Peleliu, September 1944. 5 days. That was how long American military planners said it would take. They had studied the island. They had bombed it for days beforehand. They had landed 15,000 Marines on the beaches. 5 days became 73. The coral ridges of Peleliu's Umurbrogol mountains swallowed Marine regiment after Marine regiment and gave nothing back. When the island was finally declared secure, the First Marine Regiment had ceased to exist as a functional fighting force. Japanese commanders who had watched the battle from fortified caves on the ridges above understood what had happened. What they could not explain was why the Marines kept coming. This is no man's land. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. New documentaries drop every single week. To understand why Japanese commanders on Peleliu could not explain what they were watching, you have to understand what they had built inside the Umurbrogol and why they believed it was enough. Colonel Kunio Nakagawa, commanding the Japanese garrison on Peleliu, had arrived on the island months before the American landing and had done something that the Japanese commanders on Tarawa and Saipan had not done in time. He had abandoned the beach defense doctrine entirely and retreated underground. The Umurbrogol Ridge Complex, a jagged mass of coral limestone approximately 900 yards wide and 3,000 yards long in the center of the island, was a natural fortress of a kind that military engineers could not have designed more effectively if they had tried. The coral was hard enough to require blasting to excavate, and strong enough to withstand any naval gunfire or aerial bombardment available to the Americans in 1944. Nakagawa ordered his engineers to exploit every natural cave in the ridge system and to construct connecting tunnels between them, creating a defensive network of approximately 500 individual fighting positions connected by passages that allowed defenders to withdraw from a position that was being taken, move through the tunnel system, and reappear in a position that the attacking force had already cleared or had not yet reached. He positioned artillery and heavy weapons in caves that could be closed with steel doors between firing, protecting the weapons from counter-battery fire. He pre-registered every likely approach route through the ridge system with mortar and artillery concentrations so that any attacking force moving through the draws between the ridges would be moving through pre-planned killing grounds. What Nakagawa had built was the most sophisticated static defensive system the Japanese military had ever constructed in the Pacific, and he was supremely confident in it. His confidence was not irrational. The system should have been able to hold indefinitely against any conventional assault. The question was whether the assault it was about to face was conventional in the way the system had been designed to defeat. The American landing on Peleliu on September 15, 1944, was preceded by 3 days of naval and air bombardment so intense that the admiral commanding the bombardment force reported that there were no more targets left on the island. This assessment was wrong in a way that would cost the 1st Marine Division casualties that its commanders had not planned for, and that the American military had not adequately prepared its men to expect. The beach assault went in under fire that should not have existed. Japanese artillery and machine gun positions that the bombardment had failed to destroy because they were cut into coral that the available ordnance could not penetrate opened on the landing force as the first waves came ashore, and the beach casualties in the first hours exceeded anything the division had experienced on any previous landing. The temperature on Peleliu on September 15th was over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The coral terrain shredded boots and hands and required a different kind of movement from anything the Marines had trained on. The specific combination of heat, terrain, and the volume of Japanese fire from positions that should not have survived the bombardment produced a first-day casualty rate that alarmed the division's senior commanders even as the beachhead was secured and the Marines began pushing inland. The 5-day estimate had been based on an assessment of Peleliu that assumed the pre-landing bombardment had destroyed most of the Japanese defensive capability on and near the beaches, and that the inland terrain, while difficult, would fall to the same combination of firepower and maneuver that had worked on every previous Pacific island. When the Marines pushed inland and encountered the Umurbrogol, when they discovered that the ridge system had not been damaged in any meaningful way by 3 days of bombardment, that every cave and tunnel was intact, and that every approach to the high ground ran through terrain that had been pre-registered for fire from positions the bombs had not reached. The 5-day estimate became irrelevant. There was no revised estimate. There was only the ridge and the men going into it. and the question of how many of them would come back out. Colonel Nakagawa commanded from a fortified cave in the Umurbrogol that remained connected to the broader tunnel network throughout most of the battle, and the picture he assembled of the Marine assault as it developed was documented in dispatches to Japanese command that survived the battle and were later translated and studied by American military historians. What his dispatches reveal about his understanding of the battle is striking. He had predicted, based on the Japanese military's accumulated experience of fighting American forces in the Pacific, that the Marine assault would follow a pattern that the tunnel and cave system had been specifically designed to defeat. Heavy preliminary bombardment followed by a beach assault, followed by an advance inland that would slow dramatically when it encountered prepared defensive positions. The slowing of the advance would produce American casualties that the American political system, in Japanese strategic theory, could not sustain indefinitely without popular pressure for a negotiated peace. This theory was not arbitrary. It was based on Japanese military doctrine's understanding of democratic political systems and their relationship to combat casualties, and it reflected genuine strategic thinking rather than wishful delusion. What Nakagawa's dispatches document is the progressive revision of this theory as the Marine assault continued. The assault slowed exactly as predicted when it hit the Umurbrogol. The casualties were severe, exactly as predicted. What did not follow the prediction was the Marine response to the casualties and the slowing. His dispatches in the second week of the battle described Marine units continuing to assault positions that should, in his assessment, have been sufficient to stop them. His dispatches in the third week described something he found professionally bewildering. Marine units attacking ridgelines they had already lost and retaken multiple times, accepting the casualties of the second and third assault as they had accepted the casualties of the first. The fundamental tactical problem of Peleliu's Umurbrogol was one that American commanders took weeks to fully understand, and that the men fighting inside the ridge system understood immediately from direct experience. The coral limestone of the Umurbrogol was not simply hard. It was a specific kind of hard that distributed the energy of explosive detonation in ways that protected cave and tunnel positions even from direct hits by naval gunfire shells and aerial bombs. A shell or bomb that struck the coral surface transmitted its energy outward rather than inward, leaving the tunnel network beneath largely intact while producing enormous craters on the surface that were themselves obstacles to the attacking infantry. The pre-landing bombardment had been accurate. It had simply been incapable, with the weapons available, of destroying what was inside the coral. American commanders who recognized this problem in the first days of the battle attempted to address it through a series of tactical adaptations. Close air support was redirected from general bombardment to specific cave and tunnel entrances. Naval gunfire was adjusted to fire at lower angles that could potentially penetrate cave openings. Demolition teams were organized and equipped to approach individual cave positions and destroy them with shaped charges and satchel charges placed directly against the rock. Each of these adaptations required the infantry to expose itself more, to get closer to the Japanese positions than any conventional tactical doctrine recommended, and to sustain the casualties that this exposure produced. The Umurbrogol was not simply defended by the Japanese garrison. It was defended by the specific physics of its construction, which neutralized most of the American advantages in firepower and forced the battle into a form where Marine infantry capability in close-quarter combat against a fixed defensive system became the primary determinant of the outcome. Stop and consider what 73 days of combat in the Umurbrogol actually produced in human terms, because the numbers are the part of the Peleliu story that most accounts either minimize or present without context. The First Marine Regiment, Colonel Lewis Puller's regiment, the regiment that bore the initial and heaviest burden of the Umurbrogol assault, was effectively destroyed as a combat unit by the time it was relieved. Of approximately 3,500 men who had landed, the regiment had suffered over 1,500 killed and wounded in roughly 2 weeks of fighting. The replacement rate could not keep pace with the attrition. Units that had been organized as infantry battalions were fighting as companies. Companies were fighting as platoons. Platoons were fighting as squads. At the level where combat actually happens, the 8 to 13-man squad that moves, fires, and takes ground, the Marine units fighting in the Umurbrogol were consuming themselves at a rate that could not be sustained across a 73-day campaign with any single regiment. Puller's regiment was eventually relieved by the Army's 81st Infantry Division, which continued the fight for the ridges for weeks after the Marines had been pulled out. The total American casualties on Peleliu, killed, wounded, and missing, exceeded 8,000. The island's strategic value, already questionable before the landing when Douglas MacArthur's campaign plan changed in ways that made Peleliu's capture unnecessary, was effectively zero by the time it was secured. The airfield that was the primary objective of the operation was operational before the Umurbrogol was taken. 8,000 American casualties for an island that the changing campaign plan had already made irrelevant against a defensive system that the Japanese commander on the ridges above understood better than the American commanders who sent men into it. That is the number that defines Peleliu, not the 73 days, the 8,000. The American military's adaptation to the specific tactical problem of the Umurbrogol took weeks to develop and was never elegant or efficient in any conventional military sense. What eventually worked was not a tactical innovation in any theoretical sense, but a practical methodology developed by junior officers and NCOs who were inside the ridge system and could observe what the terrain actually required from the perspective of men who were dying to find out. The methodology was called reduction, and it consisted of isolating individual cave and tunnel positions from the surrounding network, destroying the connecting tunnels to cut off withdrawal routes and resupply, and then reducing each isolated position with close-range demolitions, flamethrowers, and direct fire weapons. The process was slow, dangerous in ways that conventional tactical training had not fully prepared men for, and expensive in casualties for each position reduced. But it was the only method that consistently produced results against a system designed to defeat every other approach the Marines had tried in the opening weeks. The flamethrower was the primary instrument of reduction. A Ronson or Zippo flamethrower tank could project burning fuel into a cave entrance far enough to reach the positions inside and sustain the flame long enough to eliminate every defender, regardless of how deep in the cave system they had gone. The Japanese had no effective counter to the flamethrower tank beyond destroying it with whatever anti-tank weapons remained available, and as the battle progressed and Japanese supplies were consumed faster than they could be replaced through the increasingly damaged tunnel network, the anti-tank capability declined correspondingly. The reduction methodology required infantry to cover the flamethrower tanks against infantry attack, while the tanks did the work of clearing each position. The infantry covering the tanks took the casualties that the flamethrower took away from the tanks. The math was brutal, and it did not improve across the 73 days of the campaign. It simply became the established way of doing the one thing that worked. The Japanese defenders inside the Umurbrogol's tunnel network experienced the battle from a perspective that their own dispatches and the post-war accounts of the handful of survivors describe in terms that illuminate why the system was ultimately insufficient despite being the most formidable defensive position Japan had constructed in the Pacific. The tunnel network was designed to allow lateral movement and repositioning under fire, and it performed this function throughout the early and middle phases of the battle. Japanese defenders could withdraw through connecting passages when a position was being taken from the surface and reoccupy cleared positions after the attacking Marines had moved past. This created the disorienting experience that Marine units in the Umurbrogol described consistently, taking a position, moving forward, and then taking fire from the position they had just cleared as defenders reoccupied it through the tunnels below. As the battle progressed, and the American reduction methodology destroyed individual tunnel sections and sealed cave entrances, the lateral mobility that made the system effective was progressively degraded. Each section of tunnel destroyed, isolated some portion of the network from the rest. Each cave sealed cut off a group of defenders from resupply through the tunnel system. The defenders who found themselves isolated in sealed cave sections could continue to fight for as long as their ammunition and food lasted, but they could no longer contribute to the coordinated defense that Nakagawa's system required. By the final weeks of the battle, the Umurbrogol was no longer a functioning, integrated defensive system. It was a collection of isolated pockets of resistance, each fighting independently with whatever remained in the immediate cave section, unable to communicate with or support support the others. Colonel Kunio Nakagawa sent his final message to Japanese command on November 24, 1944, 70 days after the American landing. The message reported that organized resistance on Peleliu had effectively ended, that his force had been reduced to a remnant that could no longer conduct coordinated defensive operations, and that he was destroying his regimental colors and preparing for the final action. He then organized the remaining effective men of his garrison into a last assault force and led them out of the caves in the early morning hours of November 24th. The assault was met by American positions that had been in place for weeks waiting for exactly this moment, and was destroyed with the completeness that the disparity in remaining strength made inevitable. Nakagawa died in the assault or immediately before it. The exact circumstances were never fully established because no one who was with him in the final hours survived to provide a definitive account. He was posthumously promoted 2 ranks by the Japanese military, which recognized the Peleliu defense as the most effective delaying action conducted by Japanese forces in the entire Pacific campaign. The promotion was warranted by any military assessment of what Nakagawa had accomplished. He had taken an island that American planners had allocated 5 days to capture and had held it for 73. He had inflicted casualties on the First Marine Division that effectively removed it from the order of battle for months. He had demonstrated, more clearly than any other Japanese commander in the Pacific, what could be accomplished by a defender who understood the terrain, abandoned wasteful doctrine, and built a defensive system calibrated specifically to defeat American firepower advantages. What he had not been able to explain, and what his dispatches never fully resolve, is why the Marines kept coming after everything he had built was designed to stop them. The Battle of Peleliu has been called unnecessary, controversial, and forgotten in the same breath by military historians who have spent decades trying to locate it precisely within the larger narrative of the Pacific War. The strategic necessity case against it is strong. The airfield that justified the operation was operational before the Umurbrogol was taken, and the campaign plan that made Peleliu relevant had been superseded before the First Marine hit the beach. But the tactical and doctrinal lessons of Peleliu were not unnecessary, and they were not forgotten by the men who fought the subsequent battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa. What Nakagawa had built on Peleliu was the prototype of the defensive system that Kuribayashi would refine and deploy on Iwo Jima 5 months later. The tunnel network, the cave positions with closing steel doors, the pre-registered fire, the abandonment of beach defense in favor of a defense in depth built around terrain that neutralized American firepower. Every element of Kuribayashi's Iwo Jima defense had been tested and validated on Peleliu. The American military that arrived at Iwo Jima in February of 1945 had been at Peleliu in September of 44, and the men who had survived Peleliu carried with them a knowledge of what the next battle would require that no pre-landing briefing or training exercise could have provided. They knew that the pre-landing bombardment would not destroy what was inside the rock. They knew that reduction was the only methodology that worked. They knew that the cost would be higher than any estimate, and that the only question was how much higher. The Japanese commanders who wrote in their after-action reports that the Marines on Peleliu had not behaved according to prediction were looking at men who had been forged into something by 73 days in the Umurbrogol that prediction could not have accounted for and that doctrine could not fully explain. 5 days became 73. The First Marine Regiment ceased to exist as a functional fighting force. The island was declared secure and then largely forgotten by a war that had already moved past it. Colonel Nakagawa was promoted 2 ranks for what he had built inside the coral ridges, and for the 73 days he had made America pay for ground that turned out not to matter strategically. The Marines who took those ridges knew what it had cost. The Japanese commanders who watched them take it knew what it should have cost. The gap between what they predicted and what they got is why Peleliu still matters. If this video meant something to you, hit the like button right now. It is the single best way to push this story to someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you are not already here. Drop a comment telling us where you are watching from and whether anyone in your family served in the Pacific or the Marine Corps. We will see you in the next one.